Hello, I'm Rex. This is round 3. Let's get started. Lady Carlotta stepped out on the platform of the small wayside station and took a turn or two up and down its uninteresting length to kill time till the train should be pleased to proceed on its way. Then in the roadway beyond, she saw a horse struggling with a more than ample load, and a carter of the sort that seemed to bear a sullen hatred against the animal that helps him earn a living. Sad. Lady Carlotta promptly betook her to the roadway and put a rather different complexion on the struggle. Certain of her acquaintances were wont to give her plentiful admonition as to the undesirability of interfering on behalf of a distressed animal, such interference being none of her business. Only once had she put the doctrine of non-interference into practice when one of its most eloquent exponents had been besieged for nearly 3 hours in a small and extremely uncomfortable May tree by an angry boar pig, while, contrast, Lady Carlotta on the other side of the fence had proceeded with the watercolor sketch she was engaged on and refused to interfere between the boar and its prisoner. Okay, that's horrifying. It's to be feared that she lost the friendship of the ultimately rescued lady. No wonder. On this occasion, she merely lost the train, which gave way to the first sign of impatience it had shown throughout the journey and steamed off without her. She bore the desertion with philosophical indifference. Her friends and relations were thoroughly well used to the fact of her luggage arriving without her. She wired a vague, non-committal message to her destination to say she was coming on by another train. Before she had time to think what her next move might be, she was confronted by an imposingly attired lady who seemed to be taking a prolonged mental inventory of her clothes and looks. "You must be Miss Hope, the governess I've come to meet," said the apparition, in a tone that admitted of very little argument. "Very well, if I must, I must," said Lady Carlotta to herself with dangerous meekness. Oh, she's scared for once. "I am Mrs. Quabarl." "Quabarl," continued the lady. "And where, pray, is your luggage?" "It's gone astray," said the alleged governess, falling in with the excellent rule that the absent are always to blame. The luggage had, in point of fact, behaved with perfect correctitude. "I just telegraphed about it," she added with a nearer approach to the truth. Okay, so she's a liar. All right. "How provoking," said Mrs. Quabarl. "These railway companies are so careless. However, my maid can lend you things for the night," and she led her way to her car. This is like how you get kidnapped, isn't it? So during the drive to the Quabarl mansion, Lady Carlotta was impressively introduced to the nature of the charge that had been thrust upon her. She learned that Claude and Wilfred were delicate, sensitive young people, that Irene had the artistic temperament highly developed, and that Viola was... Scroll down. Something or else... The who? Viola was something or else of a mold equally commonplace among children of that class and type in the 20th century. Oh, okay, so it's saying they're like a bunch of rich kids or something? "I wish them not only to be taught," said Mrs. Corell, "but interested in what they learn. In their history lessons, for instance, you must try to make them feel that they are being introduced to the life stories of men and women who really lived, not merely committing a mass of names and dates to memory. French, of course, I shall expect you to talk at mealtime several days in the week. I shall talk French 4 days of the week and Russian in the remaining 3. Russian, my dear Miss Hope. No one in the house speaks or understands Russian. That will not embarrass me in the least," said Lady Carlotta coldly. Very interesting lady. Mrs. Quabarl, to use a colloquial expression, was knocked off her perch. She was one of those imperfectly self-assured individuals who are magnificent and autocratic as long as they're not seriously opposed. The least show of unexpected resistance goes a long way towards rendering them cowed and apologetic. When the new governess failed to express wondering admiration at the large, newly purchased and expensive car, and lightly alluded to the superior advantages of 1 or 2 makes which had just been put on the market, the discomfiture of her patroness became almost abject. Discomfiture. A nice description. Her feelings were those which might have animated a general of ancient warfaring days on beholding his heaviest battle elephant ignominiously driven off the field by slingers and javelin throwers. Ignominiously? Ignominiously. Okay. No time. Which choice best summarizes the passage? A woman weighs the positive, negative. That's not like she's not weighing it. A correct stranger who doesn't. Maybe a woman impersonates someone who seeks no revenge. Woman takes an immediate dislike to her new employer. It's not actually her employer, right? So isn't it B? And 2, turn most nearly means. She took a turn or 2 up and down the length of the thing. She took a short walk. C. It's the one that sounds good. Passage most clearly implies that other people regretted Lady Carlotta as. It's going to be somewhere beginning early on in the passage, likely. It's there from 10 to 14. Certain of her acquaintances were wont to give her plentiful admonition as the undesirable of interfering on behalf of others. It's probably that. It's saying that this line allows me to produce my own answer for question 3, saying that they think that she's too nosy. Like she gets her nose into other people's business too much. So I'm going to say A. And A, I can check the rest, but let's see. It's anti-speed run. Like 4B is just about one lady, and the 3's question is asking about how other people, plural, saw her. 4C is about the train, so not other people. And 4D is about her wiring a message, which is not about other people. So, AA. Fine, the description of how Lady Carlotta put the doctrine of non-interference into practice, lines 14 to mainly serves. Let's go read it again. Only once had she put the doctrine of non-inference into practice when one of its most eloquent exponents was besieged for nearly 3 hours in a small and extremely uncomfortable page while Lady Carlotta on the other side of the fence had proceeded with the water dishes and refused to interview. So she like was being a smart ass or something, and she was like, oh, you don't want me to help? I'm not going to help. Foreshadow her capacity. She's not tricking anyone. Illustrate the subtle cruelty in her nature. Like maybe provide a humorous insight into her character. Maybe explain a surprising change in her. I think it's like B or C. I'm going to side with C here, I think, because like I don't think that it was necessarily cruel because the lady was okay. And then it's like I don't think she's cruel like later on in the passage. I think that there's a lot of narrative like clues here that tell me that the author meant to say this in a humorous way, especially by stating the obvious in the following sentence where it's like, oh, unfortunately, they're not friends anymore. I think that that was intentionally put there in order to make it sound like, to make light of the situation, so 5C. In line 55, charge. The nature of the charge, it's like a job, responsibility, A. The narrator indicates that Claude, Wilfred, Irene, and Viola are bunch of rich kids. Similar to many of their peers. Bunch of rich kids, maybe? Unusual. I don't think they're unusually creative. It said like 2 of them were. Or it said 1 of them was intelligent, right? One of them Irene has artistic temperament highly developed. I don't think that's unusually for all of them, because that's what the question's asking here. Hostile, no. More educated than others, they're A. I think it's A, given that it said that they're like, the 2 oldest are this, the middle one is this, and the youngest one is like whatever else like rich kids are like. And then so I think that's generalizing to all 4 of the kids. The narrator implies that Mrs. Corporal favors a form of education that implies, I wish them to be like not taught but interested, like that. So B. As presented in the passage, Mrs. Corporal is best described as superficially kind, but actually, I don't think selfish, outwardly, maybe. Socially irrationally bitter, no. Naturally generous, but infrequently imprudent. I don't know about the naturally generous part, but I'm going to say 9 is B or D, and then we can go back door. And given that 10 is like the last question, I think we can go from the bottom up. 77 to 82. One of the imperfectly self-assured individuals who are magnificent and autocratic as long as they're not seriously opposed. Oh, okay, well that's 9B, I think, and 10D. Next. Though there are 600 million cars on the planet and counting, there are also 7 billion people, which means that for the vast majority of us, getting around involves taking buses, ferry boats, commuter trains, streetcars, and subways. In other words, traveling to work, school, or the market means being a strap hanger? Strap hanger, like you're hanging on the strap. Ah, okay. I'm proud of myself for piecing that together. Somebody who, by choice or necessity, relies on public transport rather than a privately owned automobile. Okay. Half the population of New York, Toronto, and London do not own cars. Public transport is how most of the people in Asia and Africa, the world's most populous continents, travel. Everyday subway systems carry 155 million passengers, 34 times the number carried by all of the world's airplanes, and the global public transport market is now valued at $428 billion annually. It's a lot. A century and a half later, the invention of the internal combustion engine, a century and a half after the invention of the internal combustion engine, private car ownership is still an anomaly. Okay. Sorry. Okay. And yet, public transportation in many minds is the opposite of glamour, a squalid last resort for those with one too many impaired driving charges, too poor to afford insurance, or too decrepit to get behind the wheel of a car. In much of North America, they are right. Taking transit is a depressing experience, so negative about it for the first time in this passage. Anybody who has waited far too long on the street corner for the privilege of boarding a lurching, overcrowded bus or wrestled luggage onto subways and shuttles to get to a big city airport knows that transport on this continent tends to be underfunded, ill-maintained, and ill-planned. Given the opportunity, who wouldn't drive? Hopping in a car almost always gets you to your destination more quickly. Switch to positive tone, that might be important. It doesn't have to be like this. Done right, public transport can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than the private automobile. This is an illogical comparison. Wait, this sentence, I think, would have been wrong on the grammar section. They should have said public transport can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than that of the private automobile, because you're comparing like public transport than the transport of, I don't know. In Shanghai, German-made magnetic levitation trains skim over elevated tracks at 266 miles an hour, whisking people to the airport at a third of the speed of sound. In provincial French towns, electric-powered streetcars run silently on rubber tires, sliding through narrow streets along a single guide rail set into cobblestones. From Spain to Sweden, Wi-Fi-equipped high-speed trains seamlessly connect with highly ramified metro networks, allowing computers to work on laptops as they prepare for the same-day meetings in once distant capital cities. In Latin America, China, and India, Working people board fast-loading buses that move like subway trains along dedicated busways, leaving the sedans and SUVs of the rich mired in dawn-to-dusk traffic jams. And some cities have transformed their streets into cycle path freeways, making giant strides in public health and safety and the sheer livability of their neighborhoods, in the process turning the work-a-day bicycle into a viable form of mass transit. Why didn't they mention Japan? Isn't Japan like famous for its Shinkansens, the bullet trains? Anyway. Sorry. If you credit the demographers, this train has legs. The millennials who reached adulthood around the turn of the century and now outnumber baby boomers tend to favor cities over suburbs and are far more willing than their parents to ride buses and subways. Part of the reason is their ease with iPads, MP3 players, Kindles, and smartphones. You can get some serious texting done when you're not driving, and earbuds offer insulation from all but the most extreme commuting annoyances. Even though there are more teenagers in the country than ever, only 10 million have a driver's license versus 12 million a generation ago. Baby boomers may have been raised in Leave It to Beaver suburbs, but as they retire, a significant contingent is favoring older cities and compact towns where they have the option of walking and riding bicycles. Seniors, too, are more likely to use transit, and by 2025, there'll be 64 million Americans over the age of 65. Already, dwellings in older neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and Denver, especially those near light rail or subway stations, are commanding enormous price premiums over suburban homes. Okay, I get it. It's okay. The experience of European and Asian cities shows that if you make buses, subways, trains more convenient, comfortable, fast, and safe, a surprisingly large percentage of citizens will opt to ride rather than drive. That was a double back-to-back serial comma sentence. That was a lot of commas. What function does the third paragraph serve in the passage as a whole? Oh, this is the one where, like, North American public transport sucks. It might be A. Illustrates the detail of the arguments made in the first two. No, the argument of the first two paragraphs was that, like, public transport is good. Gives an overview of a problem that has not been sufficiently addressed by the experts mentioned. I don't think that he's blaming the experts. Like, in order for this to be right, they'd have to say that. Advocates for abandoning a practice for which the passage as a whole provides mostly favorable data. He's not saying, like, abandoning... it advocates for abandoning a practice? Isn't this backwards? Because this is saying that, like, it wasn't the passage talking about how we should engage in more public transport? I think this is A. Which choice does the author explicitly cite as an advantage of automobile travel in North America? Backdoor. Let's just see which line answers that. Traveling to work means a strap hanger. That's not private automobile. 20 to 24. Public transportation in many minds is the opposite of glam. That's still public. 24 to 26. In much of North America, there's still right-taking transit. Still public transit? Is it 32 to 34? Given the opportunity, who wouldn't hopping in a car? Oh, it's that. It gets you to do more quickly. So it's going to be speed. So 12C, 13D. The central idea of the fourth paragraph is that other countries are really good at public transport, unlike us. A would be kind of nice, but European here gives me the little heebie-jeebies, because I remember I was like, oh, why didn't they mention Japan? And I said that because they mentioned China and India. So not just European. Some public transportation systems are superior to travel by, yeah, it might be that. Americans should mimic, this is like the should there is way too opinionated. It didn't have that tone associated with it. Much international public transportation is engineered for passengers to work while on board. This isn't from the beginning of the paragraph. I know that they mentioned something in like later on the top of the second column and maybe even in the next, I don't know if it was a separate paragraph or not. Yeah, it was a separate paragraph somewhere around line 64 where they're talking about the MP3 players and stuff. So that looks like a decoy, so I'm willing to bet that 14 is B, and unfortunately, we didn't have to backdoor. Okay, so let's find one that says that. Main idea of the paragraph is usually going to be located near the beginning. 35, it doesn't have to be like this, that doesn't contain enough information in it. You don't know, like, it doesn't have to be like this. What are you talking about? 35 to 37, done right, public transport can be faster, more comfortable, and cheaper than the private. It's probably that. I think it's B. 16, 58 credit. 58 credit. If you credit the demographers, this trend has legs. Like, if you believe them. Oh, believe them? See? Okay, great. Fantastic. As used in line 61, favor most nearly means 61. They tend to favor cities over suburbs and are like they prefer. B. Dude, the back-to-back target. Like, B, I think. Okay. All right, calm down, Rex. Which choice best supports the conclusion that public transportation is compatible with the use of personal electronics? That was the MP3 player sentence, I think. It says line 63-ish, I think, right? Okay, so it's like line 63 down. Part of the reason there is that. I think it's B. Which choice is supported by the data in the first figure? Primary occupation of public transportation passengers in U.S. cities. Okay, so a lot of people who are employed outside the home use it. The number of students using public transportation is greater than the number of retirees using it. Maybe. I'm going to look for like crazy answers first. The number of employed people using public transportation and the number of unemployed people using it is roughly this. I doubt that that's true because it says the same, and then the same means exactly the same. And I don't know why you would say it's roughly exactly the same. People employed outside the home are less likely to use public transportation. Oh, that I think is weird. Because all we know is like primary occupation of public transportation. Like all we know is the jobs of the people in the trains. I don't know. Maybe there's like one guy who who works at a company, but he takes the train like 50 times a day, and then so him and like other people like can get make up for a large quantity of the group they represent. So even though like not a ton of people are in their group, the fact that they're on the train constantly makes it look like that there's like would make it look like there's a high percentage of them. So I don't think that likeliness is necessarily tied to this graph. Unemployed people use public transportation less often. Unemployed people use less often than the people employed outside the home. Again, I'm not sure if it's frequency here. I don't like C and D. I think they both have their frequency aspects. I'm going to say A or B. Number of students using public transportation is greater than the number of retirees. Students? Retirees? Maybe? I think it's A, given that B, C, and D had issues. Taken together, the two figures suggest that most people who take public transportation are employed outside the home and take public transportation to work. Outside the home and take public transportation to work. I'm not sure, maybe. Are employed outside the home but take public transportation primarily in order to run errands? Get out of here. Use public transportation during the week but use their private cars on the weekend. Oh, okay, what is that? Use public transportation only, this is extreme, until they're able to afford to buy. Okay, it's A. Nice. Well, I see a large blurb that might contain information, useful information. Scientists have long debated how the ancestors of birds evolved. The ability to fly. The ground-up theory assumes they were fleet-footed ground dwellers that captured prey by leaping and flapping their upper limbs. The tree-down theory assumes they were tree climbers that leapt and glided among branches. Okay, cool. At field sites around the world, Ken Dial saw a pattern in how young pheasants, quail, tinamous, and other ground birds ran along behind their parents. They jumped up like popcorn, he said, describing how they would flap their half-formed wings and take short hops into the air. So when a group of graduate students challenged him to come up with new data on the age-old ground-up, tree-down debate, he designed a project to see what clues might lie in how baby game birds learn to fly. Okay, pretty cohesive paragraph, nice. Ken settled on the chukar partridge, the chukar partridge, I think, as a model species, but he might not have made his discovery without a key piece of advice from the local rancher in Montana who was supplying him with the birds. When the cowboy stopped by to see how things were going, Ken showed him his nice, tidy laboratory setup and explained how the birds' first hops and flights would be measured. The rancher was incredulous. Oh my goodness. He took one look and said in pretty colorful language, "What are those birds doing on the ground? They hate to be on the ground. Give them something to climb on." At first, it seemed unnatural. Ground birds don't like the ground. But as he thought about it, shouldn't there be a comma there? Like, as he thought about it, comma. Ken realized that all the species he'd watched in the wild preferred to rest on ledges, low branches, or other elevated perches where they were safe from predators. They really only use the ground. Sorry, occasionally when I'm reading, I just forget who and where I am, and then I have to pick up from, yeah, okay. So they really only use the ground for feeding and traveling. So he brought in some hay bales for the chukars to perch on, and it just happened again, and then left his son in charge of feeding and data collection while he went away on a short work trip. All right, focus. Barely a teenager at the time, young Terry Dial was visibly upset when his father got back. Sad. I asked him how it went, Ken recalled, and he said, "Terrible, the birds are cheating. Instead of flying up to their perches, the baby chukars were using their legs." Were they using their legs to fly? Time and time again, Terry had watched them run up the right side of the hay bale, flapping all the while. Ken dashed out to see for himself, and that was the aha moment. The birds were using their wings and legs cooperatively, he told me, and the single observation opened up a world of possibilities. Wings and legs together, like KFC. Working together with Terry, who has since gone on to study animal locomotion, Ken came up with a series of ingenious experiments, filming the birds as they raced up textured ramps, tilting at increasing angles. As the incline increased, the partridges began to flap, but they angled their wings differently from the birds in flight. They aimed their flapping down and backwards, using the force not for lift, but to keep their feet firmly pressed against the okay, great. It's like the spoiler on the back of a race car, well, sort of, which is a very apt analogy, sort of. I don't think spoilers flap. In Formula One racing, spoilers are the big aerodynamic fins that push the cars downward as they speed along, increasing traction and handling. The birds were doing the very same thing with their wings to help them scramble up otherwise impossible slopes. Impressive. Ken calls the technique wear for wing-assisted incline running. nice name, and went on to document in a wide range of species. It not only allowed young birds to climb vertical surfaces within the first few weeks of life, but also gave adults an energy-efficient alternative to flying. Cool, actually. Objectively cool. In the Chukar experiments, adults regularly used wear to ascend ramps steeper than 90 degrees, essentially running up the wall and onto this steeper than 90 degrees. Which way? Are they saying like they're like upside down? Or are they saying... Okay, sorry. Focus. In an evolutionary context, wear takes on surprising explanatory powers. With one fell swoop, the dials came up with a viable origin for the flapping flight stroke of birds, something gliding animals don't do, and thus a shortcoming of the tree down theory. Interesting. Negative about gliding animals that they randomly stuck in there might be important. And an aerodynamic function for half-formed wings, one of the main drawbacks to the ground-up hypothesis. Another random negative thing that might be important. Which choice best reflects the overall sequence of the events in the passage? Okay, talk about a study and then talk about what they learned. Experiment is proposed, but proves, get out of here, proves way strong. A new discovery leads to reconsideration of a theory. A classic study? No. An anomaly observed and simulated experimentally. The results are the results are compared with the previous findings and a novel hypothesis. I don't think it ended with a new hypothesis being made. An unexpected finding arises during the early phase of the study. The study is modified in response to the finding, and the results are, I think it's D. Like, yeah, maybe you can make a case for C, but I don't think you can make a case for not D, which is what you would be saying if you picked C. So, 22, as used in line 7, challenged most nearly means? A group of graduates has challenged him to come up with new data on the age. They're like, oh, like, we'll bet you can do it. They dared him? Maybe dared, because competed with means that they're like involved in it, which I don't think was they ever mentioned. Disputed with is too negative, required makes no sense. So, okay. Which statement best captures Ken Dial's central assumption in setting up his research? Central assumption, okay. Acquisition of flight in young birds sheds light on the acquisition of flight in their evolutionary ancestors. Maybe he assumed that. I'm sure the lines can help here. I'm just going to read through 23's answers first to see if there's anything we can weed out. The tendency of certain young birds to jump erratically is like that one, I think, is crazy. Young birds in a controlled research setting are less likely than birds in the wild to require perches when at rest. I don't. Maybe that's the cowboy part. Ground-dwelling and tree-climbing predecessors to birds evolved in parallel. Ground-dwelling? No, because there's like one is they're trying to figure out which one's correct, right? Ground up, tree down, and so if they both happen, then they would both be right. Okay, but let's see. We can backdoor. Question 22 says line 7, so it's probably going to be after line 7. Question 25 says 12 to 32, so it's going to be before 12 to 32. Okay, so probably not A, but yeah. So 24A, just talking about how he saw a pattern, doesn't say that it's an assumption. 6 to 11. This is when the grad students challenged him. And then he wanted to study the birds to see how they learned to fly. I guess, yeah, I guess I could see that matching with like 23A, but well, I'll check the rest because I thought which one was it? 23C was a potential answer too. 16 to 19. When the cowboy stopped by to see how things were going, this has nothing to do with an assumption. He just showed him his room. 23 to 24. At first, it seemed unnatural. Ground birds don't like the ground. Young birds in a controlled research setting are less likely to, in the wild, to require perches or arrest. He didn't specify that they were the young birds in their controlled research study. He thought that they were just like ground birds in general don't like the ground. So I see a mismatch here between 23C and 24D. So, okay, I'm going to go with 23A, 24. Which one was it? Just double check. A to D kicking in. B. In the second paragraph, lines 12 to 32, the incident involving the local rancher mainly serves to. Oh, he gave him a useful piece of advice. Reveal Ken's motivation for. I don't think the cowboy is his motivation. Underscore certain differences between field research out. Show how an unanticipated piece of information influenced, probably C. Introduce a key contributor to. No, it's C. After Ken Dial had his aha moment, line 41. I don't remember. The birds were using. Oh, he did another study, right, with his son. Yeah, he came up with a series of ingenious experiments filming the birds as they raced up. Tried to train the birds to fly to their perches? No, he let them do the wire running. Studied videos to determine why the birds no longer... Videos, I don't know about that. Observed how the birds dealt with gradually steeper inclines. Maybe, because there's a weird 90-degree thing, which I wasn't sure if it was this way or that way. The birds are running here or here, whatever. Consulted with other researchers who had, I think it's C, 27, the passage identifies which of the following as a factor that facilitated the baby chukar's traction on the way they flap their wings, right? B? I mean, don't pick C because C makes it sound like they're going like flap step, which I don't think it's like a weird dance thing. 28, as used in line 61, document most nearly means. He went on to document. It's like to record. To record. Let's go. 29, what can reasonably be inferred about gliding animals from the... Is this the contrast sentence? Wait. Line 72. Oh my goodness. Something gliding animals don't do, and thus a shortcoming of the tree down theory. Once again, a tone shift showing us how important sentences can be located deep within a passage. So it said that it's something that they don't do. They don't use a flapping stroke. D with 30D. Easy. Passage 1 is adapted in Talleyrand et al. Report on Public Instruction. Originally published in 1791. Okay, whatever. Passage 2 is adapted from Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Originally published in... Okay. The Talleyrand was a French diplomat. The report was a plan for national education. Wollstonecraft, a British novelist and political writer, wrote Vindication in response to Talleyrand. Okay. See if this person's kind of like Tocqueville, who said some not so savory things. That half the human race is excluded by the other half from any participation in government, that they're native by birth but foreign by law in the very land where they were born, and that they are property owners yet have no direct influence or representation, all political phenomenon apparently impossible to explain on abstract principle. Okay, so negative. But on another level of ideas, the question changes and may be easily resolved. Okay, so he's like, oh, it seems impossible to explain that like we're excluding half of the population, which I think are women. And then he goes, yeah, but actually it's really easy to explain. The purpose of all these institutions must be the happiness of the greatest number. Everything that leads us farther from this purpose is an error. Everything that brings us closer is truth. If the exclusion from public employment decreed against women leads to a greater sum of mutual happiness for the two sexes, then this becomes a law that all societies have been compelled to acknowledge and sanction. So a weird adaptation of John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, it seems like, where he's saying that the whole goal of society is to maximize utility, make everyone happy. So if guys and girls benefit as a whole from excluding the girls, then good. Again, I'm not saying that, he is. Any other ambition would be a reversal of our primary destinies, and it would never be in women's interest to change the assignment. Okay, sure. It seems thus incontestable that our common happiness, above all that of women, requires that they never aspire to the exercise of political rights and functions. Sorry. I'm just imagining someone nowadays trying to say this. Here we must seek their interests in the wishes of nature. Is it not apparent that their delicate constitutions, their peaceful inclinations, and the many duties of motherhood set them apart from the strenuous habits and onerous duties and summon them to the gentle occupations and the cares of the home? Okay, so women are too nice to do like hard work? I think okay. And is it not evident that the great conserving principle of societies, which makes the division of powers a source of harmony, has been expressed and revealed by nature itself and it divided the functions of the two sexes in so obviously distinct a manner? Okay, so nature also wanted the women not to do hard work. This is sufficient. We need not invoke principles that are inapplicable to the question. Let us not make rivals of life's companions. You truly must allow the persistence of a union that no interest, no rivalry can possibly undo. Understand that the good of all demands this of you. Okay, so his message is for her. Was it he or her? This person's message. It just says Talleyrand et al. Doesn't say. I didn't see it. Passage 2. Contending for the rights of women, my main argument is built on the simple principle that if she be not prepared by education to become the companion of man, she will stop the progress of knowledge and virtue, for truth must be common to all, or will be inefficacious with respect to its influence on general practice. Oh, someone's not going to get canceled. And how can women be expected to cooperate unless she know why she ought to be virtuous, unless freedom strengthen her reason until she comprehend her duty and see in what manner it is connected with her real good? Okay, so you have to make them smarter, so education. If children are to be educated to understand the true principle of patriotism, their mother must be a patriot, and the love of mankind from which an orderly train of virtues spring can only be produced by considering the moral and civil interest of mankind. But the education situation of women at present shuts her out from such investigation. I paused because that sentence structure was a little weird, I thought, but maybe okay. Who am I to judge? Consider, sir, dispassionately these observations, for a glimpse of this truth seemed to open before you when you observed that to see one half of the human race excluded by the other half from all participation of government was a political phenomenon that, according to abstract principles, it was impossible to explain. If so, on what does your constitution rest? If the abstract rights of man will bear discussion and explanation, those of women by a parity of reasoning will not shrink from the same test, though a different opinion prevails in this country, built on the very arguments which you use to justify the oppression of women, prescription. So She's like, you said it yourself. Like, it is kind of impossible to explain how half of the people are excluded from the government. She doesn't say the part where she's like, but it's actually really easy to understand. Consider, I address you as a legislature, whether when men contend for their freedom and be allowed to judge for themselves, respecting their own happiness, it be not inconsistent and unjust to subjugate women, even though you firmly believe that you're acting in the manner best calculated to promote their happiness. So it doesn't even make sense for men to subjugate women. Who made man the exclusive judge if women partake with him the gift of reason? Okay. In this style, argue tyrants of every tyrants of every denomination, from the weak king to the weak father of the family. They are all eager to crush reason, yet contrast always assert that they usurp its throne only to be useful. Do you not act a similar part when you force all women by denying them civil and political rights to remain immured in their families, groping in the dark? So very pro-women paragraph and very anti the other guy. These in line 21. It seems to us inconceivable that our shared happiness, like the happiness we have, it seems to inconceivable that our average happiness, seems to inconceivable that our coarse happiness, seems to inconceivable that our similar happiness. B, I think. It can be inferred that the authors of Passage 1 believe that running a household and raising children, that's the stuff that he wanted like the ladies to do, and that was like easy work or something, or rewarding for men. No, yield less value for society than do men. Entail very few activities that are difficult. I think it is that, because he literally said that. I think B would be an inference. Require skills similar to those needed to run a country or no. Okay, so I think it's 32C. Let's see if there's a partner for it. It would be the gentle occupations of the home sentence or whatever it said. Oh, 30 to 35. No, never mind. It would be gentle, it's right before that, so like 29, 25 to 30. Is it not apparent that their delicate constitutions, their peaceful inclinations, the many to set them up? Yeah, I think it's that. So C, 32C, 33C. According to the author of Passage 2, in order for society to progress, women must get education, enjoy personal happiness, and I don't think she said either of those things. Follow all, it's too extreme. Replace men is weird. Receive an it's D. As used in line 50, reason most nearly means on this freedom strengthen her reason, like her brain power, her explanation, her intellect. Yeah. 36, in Passage 2, the author claims that freedoms granted by society's leaders have. I literally don't know. So then backdoor. Well, okay, so I can look at 36's answer choices first, see if there's any ridiculous ones to get rid of, like 36D. Privilege one gender over, I think it might be that maybe, because now I'm remembering the sentence, which is like even the men are like kind of being like, what the heck happened? Resulted in a general reduction in individual virtue, I don't know. Cause arguments about the nature, I think it might be A, but let's backdoor anyway. 37D is line 72, 78, which is after the lines for the question 38, so that looks a little weird, but I'll check it anyway. Whether when men contend with their freedom and be allowed to judge for themselves, respecting their own, it be not inconsistent and just to subjugate women. Oh, it actually might be that, so the line rule not working out for us. I'm going to check the rest. If so, what does your constitution... Yeah, that's such a weird, just tiny bit of a sentence that I can't see that being support for society's leaders granting freedoms, doing something. Truth must come to all of you. Yeah, no society's leaders. 41 to 45. Contending for the right, my inner arguments. I think it is, yeah. So, yeah, I've seen this happen occasionally where the line rule gets a little bit, like, mixed up. So, in this case, I think it is actually 37D, going together with 36A, because it does mention society's leader when it's talking about men, which is the point that she was making, not that I'm making. Okay. In line 61, 65, the author of Passage 2 refers to a statement made in Passage 1 in order to. 61 is... Oh, she's like, yeah, you kind of caught a glimpse of the truth when you were like, oh, it doesn't make sense to exclude women. So kind of saying that, like, you're raising your valid point there before you sabotage your own argument. Call into question the no. Dispute the assertion made about, I don't think she's disputing it, she's agreeing, isn't it? Develop her argument by highlighting what she sees as flawed reasoning. I don't think she's calling them stupid. Validate the concluding declarations made by the author. Validate, okay, it's none of the, it's, okay, so then we start over. Okay, call into question the I still don't think it's that. Dispute the assertion made about women in the first sentence. What's the first sentence? Oh, the half of are all political phenomena. I don't think she's disputing it. Develop her argument by highlighting what she sees. I think it is C then, weirdly. I think that she's actually calling this person like not smart, like, or that her reasoning's bad. Yeah. See? The reason is like I don't think it's the reason for why I think it can't possibly be B is that the first sentence is the sentence that she quoted, and the first sentence like literally just said like it seems impossible to explain why we're excluding the ladies. Yeah. D obviously too positive. 39. Which best describes the overall relationship between passage 1 and they don't like each other? Strongly, it's A. The authors of both passages would most likely agree with which of the following statements about women in the 18th century? What would they agree on? There are people who are women. Their natural preferences were the same, no way. They needed a good education. That's passage 1 wouldn't agree. They were just as happy in life as passage 2 wouldn't agree. They generally enjoyed fewer rights than men did. Maybe? I know passage 2 would agree with that, but with passage 1? Now, I'm going to look at this from the perspective again, where if I pick D, anything else, I'm saying that D isn't right, which I feel like I'm very uncomfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is D, but maybe future me can go and check and see if we're right. 41. How would the authors of passage 1 most likely respond to the points made in the final paragraph of passage 2? You're being evil when you're kind of subjugating women. He'd be like, no, I'm not. Women are not naturally suited for the exercise. I think it might be that. Women and men possess similar. No, women do not need to remain confined to their traditional. Well, he wants them to, or she. The principles of natural law would. Okay, this is A, because the other ones are absurd. Last one. Possibly caused by a dietary pyrethrum deficiency by Elsevier. Where do they find these names? Colony collapse disorder is characterized by the disappearance of adult worker bees from hives. Okay. Save the bees. Honeybees are hosts to the pathogenic large ectoparasitic mite Varroa destructor. Okay, that's a cool scientific name. Varroa mites. These mites feed on bee hemolymph bloods and can kill bees directly or by increasing their susceptibility to secondary infections with fungi, bacteria, or viruses. Little is known about the natural defenses that keep the mite infections under control. Pyrethrums are a group of flowering plants which include Chrysanthemum coccineum, Chrysanthemum cinerarifolia, Chrysanthemum marshalli, and related species. I'm sure I said those horrifically. These plants produce potent insecticides with anti-mite activity. The naturally occurring insecticides are known as pyrethrums. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. A synonym for the naturally occurring pyrethrums, I apologize if I'm saying that wrong, is pyrethrin. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. And synthetic analogs of pyrethrums are known as pyrethroids. Okay, this sentence is too hard. In fact, the human mite infestation, known as scabies, Sarcoptes scabiei, is treated with topical pyrethrum cream. Okay, just as a huge disclaimer. Sorry, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong the entire passage. We suspect that the bees of commercial bee colonies, which are fed monocrops, are nutritionally deficient. In particular, we postulate that the problem is a diet deficient in anti-mite toxins, pyrethrums, and possibly other nutrients which are inherent in such plants. Okay. Without at least intermittent feeding on the pyrethrum-producing plants, bee colonies are susceptible to mite infestations, which can become fatal either directly or due to a secondary infection of immunocompromised or nutritionally deficient bees. The secondary infection can be viral, bacterial, or fungal, and may be due to one or more pathogens. In addition, immunocompromised or nutritionally deficient bees may be further weakened when commercially produced insecticides are introduced into their hives by beekeepers in an effort to fight mite infestation. This is a negative B paragraph. We further postulate that the proper doses necessary to prevent mite infestation may be better left to the bees, who may seek out or avoid pyrethrum-containing plants depending on the amount necessary to defend against mites and the amount already consumed by the bees, which in higher doses could be potentially toxic to them. Oh, so even their medicine can hurt them. This hypothesis can be tested by a trial wherein a small number of commercial honeybee colonies are offered a number of pyrethrum-producing plants, as well as typical bee food source, such as clover, while controls are offered only clover. Okay? Contrast sentence, I guess. Mites could then be introduced to each hive with note made as to the choice of the bees and the effect of the mite parasites on the experimental colonies versus the control colonies. Cool. It might be beneficial to test wild-type honeybee colonies in this manner as well, in case there could be some genetic difference between them that affects the bees' preferences for pyrethrum-producing flowers. Okay. Okay, so now my butchering of that passage is over. Onwards. How do the words can, may, and could in the third pair, doesn't it make it sound more scientific? Like safe? Let's check. Where are they? 19 to 41? bee colonies. Oh, like why did line 29? Why did they start from 41? They started from line 19 just to make the reader waste time looking for reading the first 10 lines again. Sneaky. So can be viral bacteria. Yeah, I think it's going to be to make them sound a little bit more like, there's a hypothesis that we have. Optimistic, I don't think so. Created dubious, I don't think so. Tentative, maybe. Critical is kind of negative. So B, C, or D. Skeptical, declines it. Oh, I don't think it's D. D's off topic. So C, it's clearly the author's, yeah. In line 42, the author states that a certain hypothesis can be tested by a trial based on the passage. Which of the following is a hypothesis the author suggests be tested in a trial? Okay, it's backdoor because I don't remember. I'm going to go from the last one, I think, 24 to 28, given that I didn't think the line would be that early. Without at least intermittent feeding on the bee colony system, might can be fatal. I don't know. 19 and 21. We suspected that bees are fed monocots are nutritionally deficient. I don't know. 16 to 18. In fact, the human mite investigation is it's probably not. 3 to 5. These mites feed. Yeah, I don't think it's that. So it's like C or D. Let's see if there are any possible matches in 43's answer choices. Honeybees that are exposed to both pyrethrum and mites are likely to develop a secondary infection by a virus that are to both pyrethrum and I don't think it said that and mites. Did it? Let me check. 19 to 20. Anti-mite, blah, blah, blah. Without intermediate feeding on pyrethrum are susceptible to mite infestations that can become fatal. Honeybees are exposed to both and mite. No, like, because the pyrethrums would help them against it, wouldn't it? Yeah, based off of that line I just read. So 43b, beekeepers who feed their honeybee colonies a diet of single crop need to increase the use of insecticides to prevent mite. That seems a little strong that they, like, have to do it. I'm not sure. A honeybee diet that includes pyrethrums results in honeybee colonies that are more resistant to mite. I think it might be that. Yeah, not as strong. It's not as strongly toned as answer choice B, which is a good sign. Humans are more susceptible to Okay, so I think 43C, and let's see if we can find one that matches. Let's not do a mismatch here. 19 to 21. I think 19 looks crazy. 24 to 28 without bee colonies are susceptible to mite infestations, which can become fatal. That looks like a pretty good fit. Let's just double check. That includes pyrethrums. Yeah, okay, so then this is C and D. The passage most strongly suggests that beekeepers' attempts to fight mite infestations with commercially produced insecticides have what unintentional, it's like it's bad. They increase certain mite populations, they kill some benefits, they destroy bees, they further harm I think it might be D, but I'm not sure. So backdoor, going from maybe line 31 to 35. That one seems to be like in the sweet spot. Immunocompromised initially may further weakened when commercially, nice, the line rule coming to our rescue, even though it didn't work on the previous passage. Commercially produced insecticides are introduced into the hive by beekeepers and infected to fight immunocompromised or nutrition deficient bees may be further weakened. Immunocompromised further weakened. D. Okay, so that's going to be D with 46C. As used in line 35, postulate most nearly means, isn't it just to like hypothesize? We postulate that we hypothesize. Make an unfounded assumption. Okay, I don't think they're being horrible scientists and just making their minds up about stuff. Put forth a claim or idea, question a belief or theory, conclude based on. So concludes way too strong. Question I think is a little bit negative there. I remember that was in like test 1 where they kept saying question, but they meant it in the tone the meaning of it to be skeptical. I think it's B. The main purpose of the fourth paragraph, lines 42 to 50. It can be tested by a trial wherein the small number of companies offer. Okay, so test the effect of the pyrethrums or something. Summarize the results. They haven't done it yet. Propose an experiment to investigate how different diets affect commercial honeybee colony system. Maybe provide a comparative nutritional analysis of the honey. Predict the most likely. Okay, this is B. I think. Well, let me just make sure I read that. B is the one. Propose an experiment to investigate how different diets affect. Yeah, B. 49. An unstated assumption made by the authors about clover is that. Oh, I remember where clover was. It was in that paragraph. So we're going to give them pyrethrum stuff and clover, and then we're going to give the controls only clover in order to test the efficacy of pyrethrums or something. The plants do not produce pyrethrum, or members of the chrysanthemum genus are usually located near wild-type honeybee. Will not be a good food source. I think it's A, because that's the whole point. Like if they're trying to test the pyrethrums, and the control group is just clover, then that means they're not pyrethrums, right? Hopefully. Based on the data in the table, in what percent of colonies with colony collapse disorder were the honeybees infected by all 4 pathogens? Oh boy. Colony collapse disorder. All 4 pathogens. 77? B? Based on the table, which of the 4 pathogens infected the highest percentage of honeybee colonies without colony collapse disorder? Without. Nosema ceranae is 81%. Nosema ceran, D. Do the data in the table provide support for the author's claim that the infection with varroa mites increases a honeybee's susceptibility to secondary infections? Infection with varroa mites. Pathogen occurrence in honeybee colonies with and without colony collapse disorder. They don't even mention the mites here, though, so I'm going to go ahead and say that's probably... Oh, let me read the small text just to make sure. Yeah, I don't see anything about the mites. So no, they don't provide information about bacteria. They don't indicate whether honeybees... It's D. Okay, good. Onwards to section 2. Let's go.